Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jason from NYSASWO and we'll be moderating today. If anybody has a question during the presentation, please use the Q&A window on your GoToWebinar control panel and we'll make sure your question is answered. Now I'll turn the call over to our presenter, Jed. Please introduce yourself.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everybody, or around noon. My name is Jed DeGroote, and I'm our Community Engagement Manager and our Chief Data Dude here at SchoolDude. And I just want to thank everybody for taking time out of their busy day to join us for this webinar today. And really want to thank Jason and the team there for giving us the opportunity and giving me the opportunity to talk about something that I'm passionate about. And that's data and helping educational institutions tell their story and raise awareness of what's going on, the challenges that facilities and operations professionals face in education institutions. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I look forward to sharing some unique insight here today. And let me just check here to make sure my slides, there we go, are advancing there. So one of the things I really love about being in the space that we're in is the opportunity to work with educational professionals and to raise awareness in particular about facilities. There's a lot of challenges that educational professionals face in facilities, and while there's a lot of competitiveness that we see between different teams and institutions, there's really a spirit of collaboration between everybody because we do all want the same thing for our schools. We want the same thing for our students, and we want to have a good, positive experience for the students and a great learning environment. So to that end, you know, we're always working to try to improve this idea of continuous improvement. And depending on where you're at and what kind of institution you are, you might be in various states of your operations and there, but you always want to try to get better and try to continue to improve. So in order to improve, though, you have to know where you stand. And this hit home with me, and it has over the years of working with educational institutions, but I have a son that's starting competitive swimming this last year. So we started talking about times and, you know, in order to improve, you have to know where you're at. It's not possible to set clear, measurable goals to improve without understanding where you're at. And really knowing where you're at, too, has to do with not only understanding your times or your KPIs at your institution, but also to be able to compare with peers. So we're all familiar with standardized tests, and you know, we can debate the various merits of those depending on where you're at and what kind of tests are taken. But I think most of us would agree that there is value in being able to compare students to each other at some various levels, and then also being able to compare that across institutions. We don't have that same kind of standardized test or standardization across school facilities. We're starting to in certain areas. We see with some energy benchmarks and measurements and a few facilities, but really it's not anything like what we see with students and performance and testing like that. But it'd be nice if we did, and I can tell you I've worked with hundreds if not thousands of institutions all across the country, and while there are unique nuances to what each institution faces, by and large the challenges are the same or they're very similar, okay? You know, there's not enough budget. There's an aging workforce and turnover is pretty consistent. There's a perception gap, you know, what is being done and what stakeholders think is being done. And everyone's asked to do more with less. And on top of that, you know, we need to be able to report on it and use data to justify our decisions and to paint a picture of what's going on at institutions. You know, this is the same across the country, you know, across the state of New York, everywhere. Educational institutions face similar challenges. The scope may be different depending on the institution. But since we're all facing similar challenges, you know, there'd be a lot of benefit in learning from each other and being able to collaborate and see who's doing what and you know, what are the secrets to success? So wouldn't it be nice if you could compare what you're doing with peers, you know, and be able to provide a little bit of context and understand more, again, what's working, what's not working. So to that end, you know, the business world and the commercial sector has been doing this for a long time. In education, we have it in student performance. KPIs. You know, the business world calls them key performance indicators or KPIs. Another way that we like to think of it is a way to keep proving impact. And so that's what we're asked to do day in and day out, is to keep proving impact. What are the processes? What are the things that you're doing to change at your institution to become more efficient, to streamline in certain areas? And is that working or not? Are you proving an impact in what you're doing or not? So, Jason, I'm going to go ahead and if we can pull up that poll question here for our next slide. I want to see what our audience says as far as how many of you are using facility operations KPIs to compare what you're doing to other similar institutions. So I've got that on my slide here. Can you pull that? And I can't see it on my screen. Jason, is that being pulled up right now? Can you tell?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. Great. I wonder why I'm not able to see that here right now, but that's all right. Can you, has everybody filled that out there? Can you tell me what the results say right now between how many folks are using KPIs to compare to other institutions versus not?
So far, everybody no, but not everybody has voted.
Okay. Okay. And that doesn't surprise me too much. I mean, as we were going through those introductory slides there are some KPIs and metrics that are emerging that allow institutions to compare to each other. But by and large, the institutions that I've worked with over time, there's not a standardized methodology or a set of benchmarks or metrics that are used the exact same way across institutions in order to allow comparisons. So not too surprising in that. Does it look like we've had most of our attendees fill out that poll there?
We're at 54%.
Okay. Is it still, do we have anybody that's doing it yet, or is it all no still?
Still all no's.
Okay. Great. I appreciate you giving me that information, Jason. I can't see it on my screen here, so thanks for being my eyes on that one. And I think we've given everybody enough opportunity to fill that out, so we can go ahead and move on here. I want to share some of the different KPIs and some of the different metrics that can be applied across multiple institutions. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to fill out that poll. Before we dive into some of those different metrics and KPIs, and if I could go back to my slides here, Jason, I'm pulling up Napa Valley, wine country there. Can you see that on your screen right now?
Yep, the poll's closed.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So let's take a flight. Let's head across the country and let's go to Napa Valley, to wine country here. And what I want to talk about here is there's something interesting when you look at these vineyards and you think of you know, a chief farmer at some of these different operations there. They have a lot of things that they have to keep track of, like anybody at the head of an organization, whether it's a facilities or operations team or whatever institution you're at. When you're in a leadership position, there's all kinds of things that you have to keep track of. And it's hard to keep your finger on the pulse of everything. Well, what they have here in Napa Valley at these different vineyards, at the end of each one of these rows, you can see some of these rose bushes there. And I wondered, you know, what was the purpose of that? Why were these rose bushes there? Is it something for aesthetics? So when we're doing these tours, you know, let's face it, the vineyards, the rows of grapes themselves are not particularly appealing to look at. So maybe it's for aesthetics or something like that. But when you talk to a farmer, you find out that they actually serve a real practical purpose. And the reason that these rose bushes are there at the end of these vineyard rows is because the rose bushes share a lot of the same characteristics as the grape plants do when it comes to disease or resistance to pestilence and those types of things. So these rose bushes, they serve that practical purpose, and they can tell the farmer just by walking down the rows and glancing at these, if they see any rose bushes that are starting to wilt or look diseased or not well, then they know that there's a problem area there. There's something going on in that area, whether it's with disease or pests or something like that. And that's where they need to spend their time or some of their focus on. So instead of sending people up and down these rows all day long to look at the different plants, they've got these indicators here. These rose bushes serve as indicators to tell them where they should spend their time and their energy and their focus on. And as leaders and operations professionals, we really need those things too. It's too much to try to keep our finger on everything. So we need some kind of indicators that let us know where we should spend our attention on or where we need to invest more time or resources. So, that's one way that KPIs can help. Let's talk about that a little bit more. What can KPIs do, or how can they help us? They're like vital signs, like for that farmer there. We can't look at everything. So where are the things that we really need to focus our attention on? And when we think about our health, we have vital signs. We can't monitor everything, but we have our heart rate, pulse, obviously, might be like your vision test that you have to take. For me, cholesterol levels is something that's one of my vital signs that we have to pay attention to. So KPIs act as vital signs within your organization. They allow you to do comparisons to others so you know where you stand. I might have a cholesterol number from my doctor, but in and of itself, that might not mean much or anything to me if I don't know what it compares to other individuals of my age and weight and that type of thing. So they allow comparisons. As we talked about with the Napa Valley analogy, where do we need to spend attention or focus on? KPIs can help us with that. Again, along the lines, thinking about comparisons, where am I, where do I stand? And then really some of the biggest things that we hear from folks too is, what's possible if we do focus in certain areas? What's going to be the outcome? What's the value of it? What's the so what if I do something to affect this KPI? So without these kind of measurements, you don't have those things. Now that being said, I want to say, if anybody's talked with me before or been to any of our conferences, we talk a lot about KPIs and big believers in that. But in and of itself, KPIs, they're not a panacea, okay? They're not the answer to everything. In fact, they're really not the answer, period. They often lead to the answer. So knowing that 63% of all routine repair requests are completed in 1 week, that's not an answer to anything. That's not a solution. But what it does is it spotlights or puts the spotlight on top performers that are performing above that mark, so we can see, who's doing the best. And we can talk to them and say, how did you do that? What kind of processes do you have in place? How are you assigning work? Or what kind of technology are you using? What did you have to do to implement some of your process changes? How did you have to get buy-in from your staff or from other leadership in the organization? And then, how long did it take? Was it an arduous process? Was it something that you could implement relatively quickly? And then what was the benefit? What was the value when you did implement that new change? So KPIs, they're great, but in and of themselves, they're not the answer. They lead to the answer. That's the whole concept here. So a lot of things that the challenges that you're up against and that KPIs can help with, the lack of context, whether it's, if you don't have a system in place or you just don't have the data, so you're not able to create a baseline to know how you're doing today, having KPIs and standards can help you with that. Maybe you do have the data and you're comparing your performance to yourself, so you're looking and seeing how you've done over time. But without a context or without any other perspective of what your peers are doing, then there's still a lack of context there that would be nice to have. KPIs can help you avoid making assumptions, and we can't afford to do that nowadays. You got to make data-driven decisions. So when you're making these difficult budget and resource decisions, you've got to have data to back that up. You may be doing some different things to improve your processes, but if you can't chart that over time, like if you're rolling out a pilot program at one individual building, maybe you're rolling out a pilot program to implement a new requester form or something like that. Is that working or is it not working? You can't base your decisions on assumptions. You've got to have some data behind it. And also, when you do something that you think is working well, you need to have evidence. So the challenge of not having any evidence, or maybe it's anecdotal evidence, but you need qualitative as well as quantitative evidence to say, what we did is working. Let me show you when we implemented, what the KPI was at the beginning of it, 3 months later, what we're looking at now. So, and also it's another good way, we hear this over and over again when we show these KPIs, when we talk to institutions about it, it's a way to keep teams motivated. When you tell your team, and I can speak from experience here as well, hey, you're doing a good job, pat on the back. Well, how are we doing a good job? I'd like to see how, I'd like to know what we're doing. How are we contributing to educational institutions? How are we improving the overall state of operations and raising awareness? Providing evidence to do that is a big thing. So going through, I'm going to go through a couple more of these before we jump into the KPIs, but just articulating the value of KPIs. So being able to set standards, and we mentioned it at the beginning when I talked about my son and just starting swimming, but in order to set clear, measurable goals, you need to have standards. You have to know where you're at, and you have to know what that means or where that's at in your space compared to peers. So being part of a community, being part of an association or a group that works together to come up with standards, there's a lot of value in that. Then you can set clear, measurable goals going forward. Being able to analyze and look at the data, no longer guessing or making assumptions. You can be confident that the steps that you're taking are based on data and that it's tried and true and that it's something that is going to work going forward. Also, on the flip side, if there's a process that you're suspicious of or maybe it's not working as well as you thought, using data and KPIs can help you isolate the problem and see, where's it working, where is it not, and if it's not working here, why not? Let's look at all the various factors that might impact that. It might be some different employees, or there might be a stakeholder there that's not doing something in the process the way it was intended. So it helps you troubleshoot where your processes may be weak. And then, when you can stop guessing, you can feel confident in making investments in the areas where you're going to get the greatest return. And being able to show your progress and prove, whether it's to your team, whether it's to your superiors, whether it's to the stakeholders or to the community, being able to show progress and being confident in that, showing accomplishments over time, being able to protect those resources and protect your team, or make cases for new resources. Those are all things that KPIs can help you do as well. So this just kind of rehashes the last couple of slides that we were looking at, but I want to share just a tale of two departments. And when I was working with a superintendent a few years ago, he was sharing with me what he described as a tale of two departments. And he knew both of them. It was the IT department and the maintenance department. And I've worked with hundreds on both sides. And this case was similar. He said he knew that both of them were underfunded, both of them were understaffed. They both needed additional resources, and he didn't have much to give to either one. And when he went down to do a review and talk to each one of them separately, he said there was a pretty stark difference in the conversations that they had there. One of them was very much organized, was able to present some very clear data, was able to present standards and metrics that they were using to measure efficiency, to measure productivity, and they were able to articulate a story on what's happening and what would be the impact of taking away more resources or adding additional resources. The other one did not have any data. It was more anecdotal evidence. There was complaining, saying, we can't get to everything. We don't have enough staff. But there wasn't any kind of data or evidence or anything else. It was more, it came off as, frankly, as whining a little bit. And that superintendent said, even though I know that both of them need resources, and I know the one might be right, that they're short-staffed, I don't have much confidence in giving any more resources to the one that didn't show me anything. Why would I give them more when I can't even see what they're doing right now? There wasn't any confidence there. And so in that case, it was the maintenance department that had a strong system in place and strong leadership and strong metrics, and they were able to make a compelling case, and the superintendent felt more comfortable giving what little resources they had to that department there to help them out more, because he felt like it was going to be a better investment for the overall institution. So now, before we dive into, I want to go into 5 KPIs that everybody should be aware of, but let's talk a little bit about some of the different categories in the operational space and with educational institutions that we've worked with over the years. And these are just some of the different categories. It's not all inclusive, but it does cover a pretty wide stretch of the operational world. So maintenance and preventative maintenance, so looking at work order type metrics, completion rates, productivity, how much work is being done, how much of your resources are being dedicated or allocated to preventative maintenance tasks, what kind of equipment and assets do you have in a system, or are you aware of, or can you keep track of? Inventory control is an area where there's a huge opportunity whenever we talk to folks at schools. Huge opportunity for improvement. Oftentimes it falls in between the business office and the maintenance office, and so sometimes there's not a lot of visibility within that inventory control. but having measurements in there will pay off dividends. And the safety and mobile readiness and having safety plans accessible, another area. Of course, IT, I mentioned that, the tale of two departments. Again, knowing what kind of work's coming in, what kind of assets have to be maintained. Facility use is one area that often gets overlooked as well, kind of like inventory, but what's the impact of renters on your facility? Energy is a pretty common one, and that's probably the one that's most developed in this space, in my opinion, as far as being able to compare other institutions on a cost basis. There's still a lot of areas where there could be some improvement, but and then field trip management is one that we hear often a lot of times too, that falls within the facilities and business world, and there's a lot of gray area where there's not clear insight as to what's going on at certain institutions. But there are KPIs for each one of these different categories there, and they play a role within your organization, whether you're aware of all of them or not. So 5 KPIs that leadership and that operations professionals should be aware of. And I'm going to dive into each one of these. We'll talk about the definition and methodologies for figuring these out, and then give you some national benchmarks and standards for each one of these. But first one, when we talk about your building portfolio, your physical plant asset, CRV and FCI, that's current replacement value, and FCI is facility condition index. So I'll dive into each one of those here shortly. And then the next one, PM to work order ratio, that's your preventive or planned maintenance work to your repair reactive work orders. So how much of your work is preventative or planned maintenance versus reactive work? Another one after that is commonly referred to time on task, or we call it wrench turning time, so hours per employee per week. So how productive, this is a measurement of how productive your employees are. The next one covering energy intensity, or EUI is another acronym for it. Also KBTU per square foot is another way to look at it. So how much are each one of your facilities using, how much energy? Excuse me. And then the last one that we're going to cover here is looking at the facility usage by outside groups at institutions, and how much cost is recovered per student per year. So how much of the cost that you're incurring for rentals are you bringing back into the budget or into the general ledger or your department? So before we do a deep dive into this, I've got one more poll question would love to get our audience's feedback on. So how many folks out there, and Jason, if you could pull this up for me, how many of you know the current replacement value of your building portfolio? So how many know the current replacement value of your building portfolio? And Jason, I'm looking around here, but I don't want to close out any windows and cut off the webinar. So if you could just give me an update every once in a while, let me know if it's being filled out still and what the results say.
Yep, we have 68% right now.
Okay, and 68% say they do know the CRV, the current replacement value?
No, that's how many have voted.
Oh, okay.
We have 50% yes and 85% no.
Okay. Interesting. Very good. Again, I would say, depending on the audience, that's fairly representative as well. So,
it's what, 2080?
Well, we're 2080. Okay.
Yep.
Well, we're gonna give them a way to figure it out relatively easily. Give a good swag at what that CRV is and why it's important to know that too. Plays a big role in how much should be funded every year for those facilities replacements. Does it look like we've had most of the majority of folks fill out the survey?
Yeah, we have 79% right now.
Great. Okay, let's go ahead and move on, and thank you everybody for filling that out. That's good information to know. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. So is my CRV slide up on your screen, Jason?
Yep.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. So CRV, current replacement value. This is going to let you know how much whether it's one individual facility or whether it's your whole building portfolio, how much is that worth? And there's a quick way that you can figure this out if you don't know what it is. So we're going to give you a little bit of a cheat sheet here. So national average, first you have to know what your square footage is for your facility or for your building portfolio. And if you don't know what that is, you can do some quick math. You look at the national average is about 150 square feet per student. Okay, of course there's going to be a little bit of variability, but when we check that over and over again across different parts of the country, that's what it works out to. Now, if you're a higher ed institution or a private institution that has housing for students, then that's going to be a little bit different. But for your learning facilities, it's about 150 square feet per student. So then you multiply that by your student enrollment, and most everybody here is going to have a good idea, a rough idea at least, of what your student enrollment is. So once you have that, then you've got your square footage there. So when you have your square footage, 150 square feet by your student enrollment, then you can multiply that by what the replacement cost is per square foot. And a national average, and it's going to be up in the Northeast, it's probably going to be closer to $200 or maybe even a little bit more than $200 per square foot. So let's do the math on that. I realize I've picked a relatively medium to larger institution, but if you're looking at an institution that has 10,000 students, you multiply that by about 150 square feet per student, so that's a $1.5 million, or excuse me, 1.5 million square foot building portfolio. So in this case, let's do 1.5 million square feet times the $175 in construction costs per square foot, and then we get our current replacement value of $262,500,000. Now, given when we do this over and over again across the country, it's within 5 to 10% most times of what folks will tell us their CRV is when they know that. So let's go into FCI, and we'll talk about why this is important. You've got to know that current replacement value to know what you should be funding in there as well too. Now, FCI, your Facility Condition Index, works with your current replacement value to give you a benchmark of what kind of condition your different facilities are in. So if you're looking at whether you need to retrofit everything or get a building and replace everything in it, or really if you just want to see if some buildings need to be discontinued anymore, having an FCI is going to go a long way to helping you figure that out. So what it is basically is looking at the backlog of repairs or your deferred maintenance divided by your CRV. So in our example here, with our institution of 10,000 students, we have a current replacement value of just over $262 million. And let's say that we have a backlog of about $34 million, which is actually low compared to the national average. The latest report, American Civil Engineers, and then the 21st Century School Fund actually did a report on deferred maintenance, and it's closer to about $5,000 a student across the United States. But in this one, we're looking at $34 million in our deferred maintenance backlog. So we divide that $34 million by a $262 million, and then we get an FCI of 13%. So what that's basically telling us is 13% of our total building portfolio is in backlog and needs to be replaced or fixed. Now you can see here at the bottom, the typical FCI in the United States exceeds 25%, and that was that American Civil Engineering report a few years ago. That's not great, okay? In the commercial sector outside of education, anything that's over 25% is probably going to be completely gutted and rebuilt or demolished, and a new facility is going to be built. So a good way to, this is just basically giving your buildings a scorecard, and if it's anything, well, the American Civil Engineers Society say anything above 25% or around 25% is graded as a D. When you get your new facilities, I mean, it's going to be close to 1 or 2%. It's not going to be that much, but over the course of time, after 10, 15 years, that FCI is going to creep up there if you're not continually pouring resources back into it. So the reason why these are important is to say, how much should we be funding to address this backlog, to keep that down? Again, the American Civil Engineers and other facility planners over the years, higher ed and K through 12, have looked at this and studied it. And the rule of thumb is 2% rule. So 2% of your current replacement value if you want to reach a 30-year design life. Some say closer to 3% if you want a 50-year design life. There are experts that say 1 to 2% is enough, but it doesn't address any current backlog that you might have. So what we're talking about here for this 10,000 student school system of $262 million for the current replacement value, they need about $5.2 million just to keep up with everything that's failing. And let me bring this just outside of schools for just a minute. Purchased a house, my wife and I purchased a house a couple years ago. The house is about 15 years old, so for those of you that have houses that are that age, you know things start to fail a little bit. Still relatively new, but I mean carpets, you know, we're looking at carpets possibly being replaced. We're looking at maybe windows. Hopefully we have a little more time on that. HVAC systems are starting to fail. The roofs, you know, that right now the roof is fine, but another 5-10 years, you know, we're going to be looking at that. And my wife's saying, gosh, I can't believe we have to replace all this stuff. Well, I talked to her a little bit, and she maybe didn't appreciate it as much as I did, but you know, the 2% rule, it's the same kind of thing. Look at what we paid for the house. We have to invest about 2% every year in that house to keep those things up to date. Now, it's not going to be 2% every single year. We might get by a year or two without doing anything, but then, you know, we're going to have spikes when we do need to replace the HVAC or when we do need to replace the roof. It's the same thing at schools here as well. So, and I'll bring up just one other story, and a lot of you might be able to relate with this as well. But you know, I talked with my dad, and he would talk about how you know, I can't believe we're having to put in more money to this new high school. This new high school, why do they keep asking for more money every 5 years? The new high school he was talking about was 20 years old. All right. He just didn't have a context or think about it in the same way we do with our homes. Now, if you had a home that was 20 years old, you wouldn't be surprised that you have to replace some of those things. But for some reason, he didn't apply that same logic to schools. And I think that's pretty standard across the board for general stakeholders and public. So having these kind of benchmarks and the 2% rule based off your CRV, that could go a long way to help raising awareness of what's actually needed to continually feed into that. And if you're not spending that 2%, then you're going to have things that go into backlog, and that's what we see across the country. So, okay, off my soapbox for that one, which I told you I get passionate about a lot of these KPIs and how they can help institutions raise awareness. So I'll get on a different soapbox. We'll talk about the preventative maintenance work compared to your reactive or repairs that happen. So PM to work order ratio. And what this does is just basically put a spotlight on the allocation of your proactive and planned maintenance work versus what you're taking in as repairs. And across education, national average is around 15%. Okay, so for higher ed and private institutions, it's slightly higher. It's about 17 or 18% is the KPI. 17 or 18% of the work is PM. If we look at all education together, lump it in, it's about 15%. So either way, they're within 1 to 2% of each other. So 85% of the things coming in are repairs. So why is this important, and what do we get out of it if we improve this PM to work order ratio? And there was a study done. We did a study a couple of years ago, and the graph that's up here is from 2007 to 2011. We've replicated this study at least a half a dozen times, looking at different states across the country. We've updated it, so now it's looking up through 2014. And it's funny the way that these big numbers work out, the law of big numbers, but we see the same trends over and over again, and they're very close as far as the numbers. But if you can get your PM to work order ratio up to about 30% or more, and you can sustain that for a period of three years or more, we look at institutions that did that, what we saw was a 50 to 65% reduction in the rate of emergency work. 50 to 65%. The reason why there's some variance there is because we did break it out by different education segments. But either way, that represents a huge reduction in the amount of catastrophic failures. So that emergency work could be anything from a boiler going out in the wintertime and maybe causing a closure of school. It could be a cooler failing and losing $50,000 worth of food. It runs the gambit of what could be emergency work. But that represents a significant amount of emergency reductions. Along with that, we saw that the cost per work order went down from 30 to almost 40%. And so what you see on this chart here is folks that were doing PM at 30% or more over 3 years. That's that blue line as their PM rate starts to go up. And the red line represents the emergencies that went down. So again, we see this over and over again. And there's a lot of compelling data out there now, and we helped do some of it in our study. Folks know anecdotally that PM work pays dividends. It's really hard to understate the impact that a preventative maintenance program can have at an institution. Prolonging roofs by 3 to 5 years saves big dollars. Prolonging those rooftop units, those air handler units, HVAC, that has a huge impact at the institution as well. So can't say that enough, the importance of getting a PM program at your institution. So the next KPI we're going to look at, wrench turning time. Okay, wrench turning time, time on task. I've heard some folks call it that. I like that term too. This is a productivity indicator of employees in the maintenance department. How much time are they actually able to accomplish? Now think about all the different things that goes into a repair request and it getting to a technician or the person that's actually going to complete that job, and what would contribute or take away from that wrench turning time. So, getting parts, that would be one thing. If they're not right there, that's a significant contributor to losing wrench turning time. Traveling in between sites, windshield time. Not even getting the work assignment until the next day. Maybe you were on site at a school and a request was submitted in at 1 o'clock. You didn't get it till the next day because it was just sitting in your box and there wasn't anything notifying you electronically. Waiting for a room to be open, not being able to work on an issue until it's open because class is in session. And some of the stuff is understandable. You can't eliminate all of this, but my point is there's just a lot of things that take away from actual wrench turning time. So that means there's a lot of opportunity to improve that in different areas. Again, you're not going to eliminate everything, but there's a lot of room for improvement. So we did a study on that as well, and it's funny, some folks were surprised when they saw this, but the average time on task or productive time per employee per week is about 20 hours. Now, that correlated or really matched up with when we were doing this. There was some research by Microsoft in 2011, I believe. It might have been a few years before that, but they did a study of their employees. I think they looked at about 11,000 employees, and they saw that for their productive time, it was around 22 to 23 hours a week. So not too far off from what we see in the educational operations world of 20 hours a week. And you can see here it's broken out by the different education segments that we look at. In this case, it's very similar, 19 to 20 hours. But again, the point here is that there's a lot of opportunities for improvement within this, whether it might be instituting a policy or a process of using mobile technology. Institutions that use mobile technology can gain up to 3 to 4 hours per employee per week. That's the equivalent of adding 1 productive month per year. Or if you're an institution that has 10 employees, if you had 3 to 4 hours per employee per week, for every 10 employees, that's like adding another FTE. So there's a lot of ways that you can cut down on that, on the things that are taking away from productive time. The key thing, like we said at the beginning, is just knowing where you're at right now. Are you around this 20 hours? If you're operating around 26 or 28 hours of productive times a week, you're top in class. You're doing some great things. Then that's who we want to talk to get insights. What are you doing there? How are you getting them to be more productive? What kind of processes are you doing? So if you're in that area, that's great. If you don't know, this is a good benchmark to start with. You're probably somewhere around here, and then you can start keeping track, and then you can look for areas that you can improve. So a couple more KPIs that I want to go through, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions as well. This one is our energy intensity per square foot. Okay, another way of calling this is KBTU per square foot. And what this does, this is probably one of the most common ways that folks start to look at comparing their different buildings and seeing which ones are efficient, which ones aren't efficient. So KBTU combines all of the different types of energy. So it doesn't look at water utilities or trash or something like that, but the energy, the natural gas, the propane, the fuel oil, the electric, those types of energy things, and it converts them all into one unit. So it allows for comparisons, apples to apples comparison. Now, what we're looking at here is what an institutional average is, and this varies pretty significantly between higher ed and public K through 12 and even higher or private K through 12. But a good benchmark for average performers is around 50 kBTU per square foot. So if you're comparing yourself to other peers and you're far above that, then you might have some inefficient buildings that you need to look into. If you're far below that, then there may be some other factors to explain that as well. But kBTU per square foot is a great way at an institution level when you can compare between your different buildings and find out where are the energy hogs, where's my low-hanging fruit, what are some things we can do with either behavioral changes or structural changes or modifications or retrofits to improve our overall energy consumption. All right, and so our last KPI, well, I say our last, I think there's a couple other ones I want to do deep dive. Our last one we're going to do a deep dive into is our cost recovered for community use of schools. And I mentioned at the beginning, this area is one that oftentimes can be overlooked. People forget or don't think about the impact that rentals have on their schools. And so what we're looking at here for folks that have taken that into consideration, how much of those costs are they recovering? And in most schools, they're not expecting to recover 100% of that cost, but when they see how much cost they are incurring, they want to recover as much as they can to put back into the institution to help with the primary mission, which is having a good educational facility and environment, learning environment for students. So there's this metric now to enable, in order to compare schools of different sizes, we normalize it by using students, and we have this cost recovery per student per year. So I want to talk a little bit about the costs incurred at educational institutions for rentals. And if you look through this, this is a calculator that's been developed. A lot of other folks have developed their own calculators or even just worked it out when they're doing a business case. But things that you should think about if you want to guess what is the impact on rentals at your facility. First, you need to have that benchmark of how many events are happening at your institution. One event per student per year is a good benchmark. If you're a larger institution, north of 20 or 30,000 students, it's probably half that. It's probably half an event per student per year. For your smaller institutions and for private schools, it could be almost twice as much as that, so 1.5 to 2 events per student per year. But if you don't know at all, if you have no clue, the 1 event per student per year is a good place to start to estimate how many events are happening. Now, when an event takes place, there's a lot of different moving parts. So you've got to have administrative staff book the event, look on the calendar, find space, and then when that space gets vetoed because somebody else is already there, they have to go through the whole process again. So that takes a lot of time. Having custodians or some kind of person there to unlock the door, to lock the door when they're finished. There's energy costs involved as well if you need to condition that space with heating or air conditioning. And then just the general wear and tear on the carpets and on the rest of the facilities. Also supplies, things like paper towels, toilet paper, whatever else may be used there as well. So there's a lot of different moving parts. Some of it's administrative, some of it's hard costs in the way of supplies and general wear and tear. When we do a conservative estimate, we say it's about $70 a student a year is what the average institution is incurring for rentals. That's big, $70 a student a year that's being donated for these different events. Now, for school events and community events and nonprofits, a lot of folks will say, yes, that's acceptable. We're going to donate some of our costs to that. When you talk about other for-profit institutions that are eating up to $70 a student per year too, that's when you have to consider, how much should we recover in costs. When we look at our national trend, you can say, most recently the number is $18.68 is recovered per student per year. So for that 10,000 student district, let me see if we do, let's round it up to $20, be about $200,000 a year would be recovered. I think I have it broken down on the next slide here as well too. Represents a significant financial impact that could go back into the general ledger or back into the operations department. This trend has been going up over the years as there's been more awareness of and more people thinking about the cost they're incurring and able to make business cases to recover some of that cost. So if we look at it, and depending on your size here, this can give you an idea of the actual dollar amount. The average invoice total for our 10,000 student district, we have between 5,000 and 15,000. The average invoice total was about $161,000 at about $18.77 a student. Again, this just gives you an idea of where you could be how your peers compare. And again, this is all just providing context. If you're not recovering costs already, or if you are but you don't know how much you're recovering, now you can kind of get an idea or a sense of what other folks around you are doing. Now up in New York, the averages are a little bit higher, probably 10 to 15% higher than what we see across the country as well, so you could add that on there. But if you don't have a clue where you're at or what other institutions are doing, this should give you a pretty good benchmark of what's possible. All right, so before we wrap it up and open this up for any questions out there, just some other important KPIs that we feel our operations professionals and business officers and school officials should know about. When you think about customer satisfaction, about streamlining request to completion process, one KPI is, how many requests are you receiving from online portals, and why is that important? Talk to operations folks that have to field calls every day from people that are submitting repair requests. I've talked to folks where they say they used to get 50 to 60 calls a day. When they implemented online requester portal, that went down to 1 or 2. Now their time is freed up to focus on other tasks that are more important or more pressing. Still, you need to be able to take phone calls for emergencies or when certain things come up. They can be more responsive when they do take the phone calls that they get. But if you implement an online requester portal, it frees up, it streamlines communication by automatic email, notifications, and workflow, so a lot of things around that. Your energy cost per student per year, that's a good financial indicator. We talked about the usage, the KBTU per student per year, or per square foot per year. The energy cost per student per year as well will let you know where you sit compared to other similar institutions. The average inventory that you're holding in stock, how much is that compared to other institutions? Again, we normalize it by looking at it per student per year. There's a lot of good stuff around inventory too that you can look at and take advantage of. Is there a lot of inventory sitting on your shelves that's dead and not being issued out anymore? What can be done with that? Can you resell that? Can you repurpose it? Can you order smarter so you don't have as much dead inventory sitting on those shelves? Your average cost per field trip, if you're looking at outsourcing this or keeping this in-house or not, having a good idea of what you're doing per trip and how that compares to other institutions, that can go a long way in helping make that decision. A lot of different IT KPIs, but knowing how many of your assets within your network have an expired warranty. So what are you going to be looking at replacing in the next year or 2 or 3? How many assets do you have per employee, per IT employee there? It's a massive amount. I don't have that number off the top of my head, so I don't want to give you bad information. I won't say it, but there are KPIs out there to help you know what's the workload of that IT employee and how many assets do they have to maintain. So in summary, I think it's important to remember that KPIs in and of themselves aren't the answer, but they do illuminate or shed light on the answer. I hope that everybody here learned a little bit about some of the KPIs we feel that it's important for leadership and operations to know. Your CRV and your FCI, your PM to work order ratio, your time on task, your hours per employee per week, your energy intensity, and then cost recovered per student per year. I'm more than happy to take any questions now at this point in time, if there are any questions out there. If anybody wants more information afterwards, of course, feel free to reach out. My email is just jed@schooldude.com, and I'm happy to work. As I said at the very beginning, I'm passionate about helping operations professionals make their case and raise awareness. I love having the opportunity to affect the learning environment for students. Having a couple of kids in school right now, it's something near and dear to my heart, and I think most people can get behind that. But I feel like it's a great opportunity to help make a difference. So with that, Jason, I guess I'll just leave it open. If there's any questions now or anything, I'll be happy to take them at this time. And if there's not any questions now, that's okay too. I know we went through a lot of information. So I would just like to thank everybody again for giving me the opportunity to talk about KPIs and operations and raising awareness in facilities, closing the perception gap. And if there's not any questions, then I will wish everybody a great rest of the day. Jason, I'll hang out for a few. You let me know if there's anything that comes up, and I'll field them as they come.
All right, will do.
Hey, Jason, it doesn't look like we're having any questions and folks are signing out, so I'm going to go ahead and is that all right if I sign off now, or do you want me to hang out for a few more minutes?
I think that's it. So thank everybody for coming. That's the end of the session.
Very good. Thanks for all your help, Jason. I appreciate it.